So DNASolves is relatively new. Last year, I want to say July of 2020 is when the group on Facebook was established. But Otham's been around since 2018, and there are real scientists behind it. It's not fake technology. It's not voodoo, pseudoscience. It's none of that.
And you're saying that a lot of local law enforcement are getting behind this?
Absolutely. Yeah. Everywhere. The Texas Rangers, under the guidance of the Texas Attorney General's office, actually just launched a statewide cold case unit partnered with Othram to specifically to solve cold cases.
That's pretty interesting.
It is.
You never know. See, that's modern technology today. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
You know, it's that's why I think back in the day, I don't know how far back it was started, that somebody was coming up with a law that every infant was born, they had to take his footprint and handprint or something like that. So further on in life, if something ever happened to that kid or person, whoever, they could track it down through the DNA.
Mm-hmm.
And they were doing adults and everything. So now what it was going through, even I believe they're doing it in adult correctional institution. I'm not positive, but they're doing it. When they sign up, when they come in, they take all the information and they sign up. Oh, excuse me, Pete. Are they still doing that? Do you know, in the Department of Corrections, that they're making them sign and put their fingerprints out for DNA purposes?
They do the fingerprinting, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if they do any DNA, but definitely fingerprinting.
Yeah, that's been relatively, hasn't been that long in the process, I don't believe.
No, it hasn't.
Laura, do you know how many unsolved cases that there are right now?
There are thousands. Honestly, I don't know the exact number. The last I heard, there were over 40,000 unsolved, I want to say John and Jane Doe cases across the country, but I'll have to fact check myself on that. However, this technology, it's not only useful for John and Jane Doe cases and violent crimes like unsolved murders from 30, 40, 50 years ago, and then more. It's also useful for things like sexual assaults. It's useful for a number of things that we can really dig into and tap into and use to keep people safe and to, again, serve long overdue justice for victims and their families.
Wow.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Can anybody be a part of this?
Yes, so the question
Do you
is,
have to be an agency?
no, you don't. So the question is, can anyone be a part of this? And the answer is Othram Labs, the group who's really behind the scenes with DNASolves. They do work directly with law enforcement. So a person off the street, you're not going to work directly with Othram. But with DNASolves, it opens the field for anybody to be able to contribute to a case. If you join the Facebook group, you'll see we're posting all the time about cases of interest where maybe Othram should reach out to different agencies in charge and say, hey, can we take a second look at that for you? And that's something that Othram does really well. So just to kind of give a little bit more about it, let's see. So Othram works specifically with law enforcement. So what they do the best, they'll look at analysis of human DNA from trace quantities of degraded or contaminated forensic evidence. So again, that means they specialize in skeletal remains. They specialize in the type of DNA evidence that other companies, you just can't get a match from it. So when you're at that point where everything else has failed, Othram is sort of the group that comes in and helps save the day. And they're closing cases. If you check out DNASolves.com, you can see the cases that have been fully funded. And what's really cool about it is if you contribute to these cases, especially as a subscriber, you get monthly updates about the cases as they move forward. One that's really close to my heart is called the Saginaw John Doe case. Saginaw John Doe was a teenage boy, he was an African-American teenage boy who was found shot inside of a house in Saginaw, Michigan. It's believed that he may have been from Detroit and he just happened to be there. I don't 100% know the circumstances surrounding that. No one does yet. But the unfortunate thing is that for all of these years since 1988, his identities remain unknown. But now Othram's kind of joined this case, and they're teaming up with the sheriff's office to be able to run a new analysis on those remains and the DNA samples that are available. And the hope and the expectation, I should say, is that he will get his name back. And that's just one step closer for law enforcement to be able to catch the person who killed someone's son.
You know, I just, there's an old back when trials were going on, there was a forensic statement that if you were part of a crime, you either left something there or took something with you. Does that reflect upon this?
So, I'll be honest with you, I am not the subject matter expert when it comes to this particular type of analysis. However, I'm very interested in it. And so what I understand is that we're at a point now, the fact that Othram is able to check tens to hundreds of thousands of DNA markers for identification, part of that includes touch DNA. So for example, if I went up to you and I just went like this, I left something behind, right? Even just a trace amount, and you can take that DNA and run it. And you know, before it used to be that when you were looking to get a DNA analysis, you'd have a sample of maybe the size of a quarter. Now, all you need is something that's less than the size of, like, could fit on the head of a needle. And it's incredible what they're able to do. But it really is, DNA really is the blueprint for life. And I think now we're finding these ways to make it not just a blueprint, but a map. And it works. And one of the big things now is forensic genetic genealogy is sort of a buzzword. You might hear it called investigative genetic genealogy. It used to be for hobbyists like myself who wanted to trace their own family roots, where we were able to discover that by looking through family trees and shaking down family trees, you could find the people that you were looking for. I personally found my path sort of enmeshed with investigative genetic genealogy all of my life. But in 2017, Channel 10 actually interviewed me because I used the method to find my own birth family after 24 years and reunite with them. So I knew it worked, but at the time it was sort of crazy. Yeah, I do have a question, sure.
That may be a stupid question, I don't know. If I
Not
can
at all.
ask it, all right? So this case in particular you're talking about from Cheyenne, Wyoming,
Yep.
How old is this?
So Laramie County baby John Doe, that is from 1988, so it's been 33 years that this infant has remained unidentified.
So we've had DNA for how long now?
The mid-90s is sort of when it came around, but then it, you know.
Is that common for cases to go that long? As long as DNA.
That's a great question. So the question is it common for cases to go unsolved that long? And the answer is absolutely yes. Law enforcement agencies around the country have basements full of cold case files. I'm sure Joe could speak to that for sure. Because you just, after a while, a case goes cold. And if you've exhausted all of your leads and you've relied on the existing technology, which many law enforcement agencies, they are using CODIS. And CODIS is great, and it's done a lot of great things. However, CODIS is only looking at offenders who are known within the system. So if you've never been caught, you might not actually be in that database. But
To be for.
you never know.
So it's fair to assume that they have DNA on that baby, but they
Correct.
haven't matched it to anybody. That's
Correct.
what the problem.
Exactly. So what Othram can do is once you get all of those DNA samples analyzed and they have this bigger picture profile basically, then you start looking at all of your genealogy sites, and Othram is linked up with everybody and their mother. So at that point, while we may not know who that exact person is, they share DNA with somebody, and there
Oh,
are
exactly.
millions of people. Exactly. There's
Makes
millions
sense.
of people who've contributed DNA.
Questions coming out of this?
Any questions? None yet? Cool.
One of the main things that have happened recently over the last probably 10 years is with the advent of, you could submit your own DNA sample to a genealogy base, and they will tell you your
Ancestry.
your ancestry. And there have been a number of cases, probably about 10 or 15, that have matched. They haven't found the suspect, but they have found a familial match to the suspect. One of them, which was a daughter, I believe, whose father turned out to be a serial rapist. He has since passed away,
Yes.
but the match came up when she did a genealogy sample looking to find her history. So what Lauren is talking about is this is a lot more advanced than the type of markers that those kind of systems do.
Yeah.
One of the things I can talk about is that law enforcement, unfortunately, tends to be behind the technology curve when it comes to things like these events. When I was on the police department in the early 80s, we considered electric typewriters to be voodoo. That was black magic. Electric typewriters were incredible. So, unfortunately, private industry would be getting the latest advances in technology, computers, laptops, those kind of things. Law enforcement, because it tends to be funded by tax dollars, and they tend to try to be, very, very cautious about spending that money, they don't fund as much of it. So the technology is behind. So you get a lot of agencies, an agency in Laramie, Wyoming, may not necessarily have the technology to even recover the DNA from it, let alone avenues of where to submit it. So there are literally, I think New York City alone has a backlog of something like 26 or 28,000 rape kits, sexual assault kits
Yep.
that have not been tested.
That's everywhere.
And that's
Really?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's where they have recovered physical evidence of a crime
And it hasn't been,
that
hasn't been.
might identify someone in the
Yeah.
system, but they haven't been able to test it because they don't have the resources. So what a company like DNASolves has started to do is essentially crowdfund DNA solvability, to contribute to that thing, and giving agencies, if something happens in a small town in New Hampshire, 10-man police department, that doesn't have the resources to, the technological resources to this kind of stuff, the case may never see the light of day,
That's
because
crazy.
they just don't have the resources to do it, and something else will come along and they'll just get pushed back. So you would think that, a dead child would,
Yeah.
but some of the cases Lauren's talking about, the 80s and 90s, the technology wasn't there.
So,
I mean, I retired in '98 and we were just starting to understand, the advantages to technology of DNA, so.
so if there are certain cities or certain states that have this program, if, just say I committed a crime 20 years ago.
Yep.
I get pulled in, and the place where I committed that crime has that program. And then you run my name, will it automatically come up?
I saw Michael.
That's a great question. So the question is, if you live in a state where Othram technology is more widely adopted and it's sort of embedded into the law enforcement system, just statewide, if you commit a crime, is it going to automatically show up? I'll be honest with you, I don't know the exact answer. However, I do know that if they ran your DNA, and if you were in that system, they would eventually find a match to you. It's because it's not guesswork. It's not just, you're picking and choosing things. There's no bias to it. It's
Yeah.
purely science, it's incredible, but it works.
So, once they gain access to the program,
Yep.
do they run the DNA that they do have? And do they leave it in the system, or do they do it as they go?
So DNA will stay in the system, and basically if you have a new case or you have a new sample that you're running, it's going to pick up if there's a hit in your database where there's a match in any regard from whatever percentage. And based on the percentage of a match, you can sort of determine where in a family tree that person might appear, and then it's just a matter of you sort of reverse engineer it. Like if I know I've got a 20% DNA match with you, well, I'm going to go back that far and I'm going to build my family tree forward to the present. And you sort of build out those branches and you get this wide picture. And then what investigative genetic genealogists do is they take that information that they get from census records, from marriage and death records, birth records, everything, and they'll go then to social media if they can, to other sites that they can find, just to gather as much research, because you want to get it right. You don't want to be accusing people, because that's another thing. I think people look at it, there's two ways to look at it. You can look at this like, this is a great thing, this is, a miracle, which is how somebody like me looks at it, and certainly how victim families look at it, who are the most important here. But there's also the other side of the coin, and there's those concerns like, do I really want to have that out there? This isn't a way to target people. This is a fail-safe way to solve crimes and to eradicate cold cases.
Are you a nonprofit agency?
So the question is Othram/DNASolves a nonprofit agency? The answer is no. They are a private company. They do rely on funding from their various contracts and from this crowdfunding opportunity through DNASolves. However, as far as, if I were to endorse a company that's a for-profit company, this is the most altruistic one I think I could find.
So large contribution is tax deductible?
So yeah, if you're making a large contribution, certainly write it off on your taxes. I would think that that's something that you're bettering the community at that point.
No problem getting funding.
Yeah, exactly. They should. Well, they don't have problems getting funding. I think at this point, and then certainly if you go to DNASolves.com and you look at the funded cases, there's a lot of them. But I think at this point, the whole real push is we want to push this as far forward as quickly as possible. Just because it's as this is sort of becoming more mainstream, it's helpful to get the facts out there. It's helpful to show the positive applications of the technology, and now is really the time.
One of the ways to look at it is if you know, the old thing used to be fingerprints. So fingerprints are on file. If somebody ran, let's use Jerry for example. If Jerry if Jerry were to do something, if something were to happen and they would find a fingerprint, and it happened to be Jerry's, it would pop up on a database. Okay, that would pop up. Mine would pop up because I'd been on the police department, so the FBI has my prints on file, and also because I'd been in the military, so the prints would be on file. But if you've never had contact with law enforcement, if you've never been in the military, never had any of your fingerprints on file, then the prints are going to be unknown. What this is this takes fingerprints to, you know, a much different level.
Yeah.
Everybody sheds DNA. Jerry said it earlier. You know, you commit a crime, you always leave something. You take something, you always leave something behind. And that might just be something. Used to be you needed a significant amount, be it blood or some bodily fluid to extract DNA. You no longer need that. And you remember the movie about the first black diver in the Navy? They had the whole thing about the guy who, the commanding officer who said that 90% of dust is human skin. That's true. And skin flakes contain DNA. 20 years ago, you couldn't extract DNA from those things. Now you can. So they might have a very small sample, very small markers, but they could take those 10 markers that were unavailable before and bring them back through other investigations and bring them back to, you know, identify suspects. So it's a whole different world. Yeah, the problem is, like I said before, right now
it comes in so many forms that, especially with rape victims, who a lot of the time go get the rape kit, they won't go and say anything because they're afraid of the aftermath. Whether it's the abuse that they gotta deal with mentally, emotionally, so they just close out altogether.
Well, like I said before, right now there are 26,000 or so, there are literally hundreds of thousands of DNA samples that have been recovered from crime scenes, that are sitting in police evidence lockers, that cannot be tested because their resources are not available. And the resources that were available to states before were very limited in their technology. They had 20 or 30 markers that they could look for. This company provides a solution for literally hundreds of markers that at least give agencies, it'd be like a partial print. I find a partial print that might be Jerry's or it might be Joe Brugman's. But if I have that partial print and I have at least those two names, now if I find out Jerry was in prison when the crime happened, but Joe Brugman was out on the street, I can eliminate Jerry as a suspect. Now I have, you know, now I've narrowed my field down. So that's what, nothing is exact.
No, it's never exact, but why don't all the police departments from all over the country reach out to the company, or why doesn't the company reach out to
I love your daughter.
the police departments?
Excellent question.
Funding.
So what Jerry's daughter just asked is, hey, if this exists, why aren't law enforcement agencies everywhere reaching out to Othram for help? And the answer is honestly really simple. This is new technology. 2017 is when my family story was covered, and people thought I was nuts then. 2018, investigative genetic genealogy helped catch the Golden State Killer, and that's sort of when this really went on the map for a lot of people. And now it's kind of catching on, but it's really a grassroots effort, because you have to understand, for all the people who want this to move forward, there are also some people who don't. So it really comes down to, we have to push for what makes sense. We have to get the word out there. And you know, it really is, it comes down to, if the public raises their voice enough and pushes for this, we can make it happen.
There's actually a law pending, proposed in Congress to prevent law enforcement agencies from having access to DNA databases from private companies.
Yeah, Joe is making a great point. For those who are listening, if you're unable to hear it, what Joe said is that there's a push right now in Congress to try and pass laws where companies like Othram, because there are other companies like Othram, I'm biased. I don't think they're as great. Othram does everything in house. But there are other companies like Othram who are running into roadblocks as legislation is attempted to be passed that says, hey, we don't want you using these genealogy databases with law enforcement because there's some issues there. So there's really a push right now to kind of boost the numbers to be able to show how many cold cases are solved through this technology, the benefits to society, the impact on these victims' families, and just the justice that's finally being served.